Okay, so what is this? I know it looks like an eye chart. I will move it around and fix it for you as we're going along. Don't worry about trying to see it right now. You're going to hurt your eyeballs. What we kind of did is took like a very quick snapshot of a tilt test, quick snapshot of a 10-day later tilt test. A lot of people that deal with these particular problems are young, and so they're still managing a school life, which I think is wonderful. But there's a lot of angst about, like, am I going to be able to go to school? And so this is the time of year where we're digging in, especially our college students are kind of already there and running. And we get to see like that reflection of the summer and where they're at. And it's really cool to be able to see them kind of taking on school and taking on that challenge. And for many of them, kind of thriving, kind of getting that under their wings. Because it never, you guys all, I mean, those of you, you guys all know this. Even once you start kind of getting back into your life, you don't feel ready yet. So there's a lot of like, oh man, hope we can do this leading up into it. And then there's deadline day and then off and running. And that's what this test reminded me of. So I dug it back up because we had a nice note. I just thought this was a nice thing to kind of walk us through a little bit of a clinical story. I'm not going to give much in terms of I'm not going to give any personal details, but we'll talk to you about what we saw, which I think is helpful. And just on the basics, like on the symptom side, it's the stuff you're used to hearing, right? So lightheaded, a lot of shortness of breath, big time shortness of breath, getting some PVCs, super uncomfortable. PVCs are preventricular contractions, so it's actually a heart rhythm problem too. So in addition to having POTS diagnosis, you also have this arrhythmia that comes in and it feels like skipped beats, super uncomfortable, and it also contributes to feeling lightheaded because as you skip some beats, obviously you're not pumping blood during that time, so it contributes. And just feeling a lot of anxiety with that and just feeling bad. And most of you can relate. So on the front end, I'll walk you through it. And then this will give you a little sense of a little behind the scenes. Here's what we're doing. But this is a really good, simple snapshot that's easy to show of what that tilt test is going to look like. Over here, you can see this light part. This is what we do in the test when we have you lay there for a little bit. Just get acclimated. We want to see just what life is like. And then this is the tilt portion. So in the tilt portion, 70 degrees of a tilt. So it's like standing and laying at the same time. And we measure these out through the minutes. Now you can see in this first one, we only made it to 8. So that we got an 8 count, standing 8 count, and then we had to throw on the towel. And you can see we've got some heart rate data here. We've got some blood pressure stuff here. This is capnography. Just think about this like the breathing section. And then the next part is the left and the right transcranial Doppler. Let me grab this thing. There we go. So, and that's just looking at blood flow that's coming into the left side of the brain, right side of the brain through the middle cerebral artery. And then obviously we're looking at some different variables in these. And then these are the subjective part is just like what people are saying while we're doing it. So what are we feeling? And so this I love a lot. So let's walk through it. Let me get back over here. So where I actually usually start these conversations is here in the blood flow region. Why? Because what does it take to get blood into your head? Well, good question. Glad you asked. Is you have to have a certain amount of blood pressure. If you can't generate blood pressure, the only way that you can get it into your head is to tip you upside down and hope that we can drain it into your head, right? So if you're going to get blood going upwards, we've got to have some pressure. And so we need some blood pressure to be able to push blood flow into the brain. Cool. And then how do we manage that? We manage that by constricting blood vessels, and we manage that by altering our heart rate and the contraction, like how strong the contraction is. Cool? So let's go back over here. And what we're looking at is real simply, you just want to think of, okay, these are our baseline mean numbers. These are great. 71, 74, rocking along. Laying down is crushing. And then what we're looking for is, though, in that next minute, we want it to be as close to this number as possible. So we want this number to be as close to 71 as we can, and we want 34 to be as close to 74 as we can. Why? Because all the cool stuff humans do is when we're moving and not slithering around. We wouldn't need arms and legs if that were the case. So we walk around, we walk on 2 feet. That means you got to be able to push blood upward. That means you got to be able to have some sensors that can feel if you're upward, and then be able to then fill the demand of pushing blood on up to the head. So hopefully that makes sense. So we want this number to be at least a 90%. This one on the left side crushes that, 94-ish%. But then we go over here to the right side, boom, 45.9%. So we'll round up, 46%. That's not great. That means we're losing quite a bit of that initial flow, especially on that right side of the head, right side of the brain. In that very first minute, we get a big drop. And we also see we get this pulsatility index that's really high, which means there's a lot of resistance to flow on this side that there isn't on the left side. And that matters a whole bunch, right? Cool. So by minute 2, we want to see, okay, can we at least hold it at 85%? Crushing it here on the left side. Right side, we've recovered a ton, which is great. Not quite all the way home, but big recovery, boom, we like it a lot. And then as we track that down, we want the rest of these to be 85. We did that really, really nicely. And then, but over here, you can see we're hovering around that 85, 86 mark. And eventually we just had to, after this dual tasking moment, so we're doing the math in your head, count backwards by 7s. And at that moment, we just couldn't handle it anymore, had to come down, even though we had this decent response here. Okay, and then we can come back. We're going to look at the end tidal carbon dioxide, because for every millimeter of mercury we're dropping here, we're going to drop about 3 percentage points here. But we can see that's pretty reasonable. And we're low for sure. We're too low. We don't want to be there. But we're not to the point where we should be seeing this kind of a drastic drop on the front side. And then as a consequence, you slide back over here a little bit and you say, like, did the blood pressure drop? What happened? And we can see that it didn't. It rose the way it should, so that's good news. And then the heart rate, you can see, just cranked. So we went from a 77 to a 143, adjusted back down to a 123, then down to a 97, back up to 115, 99. So we get 2 things. We're cranking number 1. And then this is kind of like, she spends a lot of time in this range anytime she's up and about, in that 143, 123 range. Like that's her cruising altitude. But she's able to kind of cool it down, comes back up, cools it down, and then she's able to recover, right? So you can see, like, not the worst one we've ever seen in terms of like overall rates. It's a little bit different. What we're actually seeing is the big notable is just this huge drop on the front end, feeling lightheaded, weak legs, sweaty feet. And then, obviously we had to pull her down, and then she recovered, slow recovery over here. All right. So that's interesting, right? So we see a lot of cases that are just like big drops, bilateral, away we go. Here's a little bit different because we're seeing that there's this kind of one-sidedness to it. This right side is affected differently than the left. And then we can see that temporally it changes. So it's that initial movement from down to up is really provocative. And there's a big symptom base there that she just doesn't quite recover from. Okay, so then we look from there and we sit up. So we sit in a chair, kind of like the one I'm in right now. Very similar to the one I'm in right now, actually. Swivel chair. And we still got the Doppler on. And we're going to look at if we're seeing changes with head movement. So seated, cervical, which is neck, range of motion, ROM, with the transcranial Doppler. And then where we actually note these, so what we're doing is we're going to have them turn and hold their head to both sides, flex their head down, tip their head back, stick their chin out, pull their chin back, tilt to the lateral sides like that. And then we'll confirm that by, so one of the things that we can't know is when we do that, if there's a problem, we don't know if that turning, that problem is coming because they got like a vestibular problem or their brain just like doesn't know how to do a turn very well and drops the flow. or if there's a problem in the neck and we actually restrict flow somewhere in the course from the heart to the head. So the way that we differentiate that is we do what's called a cervical torsion test, where we hold the head and then we're just going to turn the body underneath the head and keep the head still. And when we do that, the vestibular system and the ocular system is not moving. It's not active. So we're just straining the neck. Now, that might mean that there's a structural component to that, but it also might mean that just the proprioceptive barrage, which is like the feeling where you're at component, that can be enough to screw you up too. So it doesn't fully differentiate the structural component, but it does help us understand if the neck is a contributor. And we're looking for 20% or bigger changes, and you can see here, so right rotation, turning that to the right, decreases flow rates to that left side by at least 20%. And we noticed up here that that wasn't really like the big concern, but actually we see the pretty good cut when we're doing a head turn. Left rotation does the opposite. It decreases the right hand side. Flexion decreased the left hand side. Extension decreased the left hand side. Right lateral flexion decreases the left hand side. And then we see with the cervical torsion that the turning to the right decreased the left side, and the turning to the left decreased the right side. So we see that there's this kind of like something's up with these head turn components, because these are messing with her too. And that's really important, because that's also part of this shift between laying down and standing up is the loading of the head on the body. Okay, so that part is really, really helpful. So when we're looking at this, yes, we're looking at autoregulation, we're looking at vasoreactivity, we're looking at this screaming high heart rate, but then there are these clues that help us understand, like, this movement of the head is really a kicker for her. And it turns out also that we could kind of get a yield on being able to instigate those PVCs by doing head turns. So I can listen to her heart, have her move her head, and you hear the arrhythmias come in. In our tachycardia cases, what we're looking for as like primary tachycardia, one of the things I'm looking for is we're going to find it in that first 10 minutes, because we're going to see the response to the movement. Now, we will elongate that test when people have a history of fainting, or they have a history of orthostatic hypotension, or they have a clinical syndrome that looks like it's hypotension. That triggers a different change in our protocol, and we run it differently at that point, and we have it set up so we can run it longer, and we're looking for that breaking point. But in the tachycardia cases, we typically find that those happen with a pretty rapid onset, or we see a decay in function over that time frame. So that's a good question. And then Linda had asked, is the test you're referring to similar to shaking your head for bilateral hypofunction? Can that be connected to dysautonomia in the neck? Absolutely. Vestibular hypofunction is a predominant part for a lot of people, especially if you're noticing that dizziness. But when that test is actually a little bit differently. The head shaking test, we don't do a lot of, because it's a little overwhelming for a lot of people. But basically, you're having someone turn their head back and forth, and a lot of times you're either trying to maintain a fixation or reading a word set. But it's hard to actually detect this. The way we look at it is more through a head thrust, where we put video oculography on so we can measure the eyes, and then we do a thrust of the head so we can see if there is a saccadic intrusion. They're different beasts, but they do link up in terms of that central vestibular system and how they talk to one another. Okay, so this is the post one. First thing that jumps out at you, we made it 10 minutes, so there's a big win. That's pretty fun. Yeah, so she was a struggle bus on this one. Now, this is 10 days later. That's not very long when you've been dealing with this for a long period of time, right? So 10 days later, working hard, and primarily working on things that revolve around this neck of hers and the stability of being able to control it, as well as just the simple structural posture underneath that. So those of you that are laughing because I'm a chiropractor talking about necks, I get it. But in this particular case, that's where we're at, is we're thinking about her neck. So just rerunning the test, you can actually see the mean values are lower, but they're still actually in a really beautiful range here. And then, so we're not getting these big, huge peaks, which is kind of like we were hoping for a little bit, because if we're cranking it up through there, sometimes we're looking at a higher resistance rate, and that forces that value up. So even though the overall value is low, it's still in this beautiful sweet spot for her age. And then you see these nice responses here where we're not having that big latency drop. Numbers are all in the 90s and 100s, which is wonderful. We've clipped up these ETCO2 scores a little bit. They're not cranked all the way up yet, but we're seeing them start to trend up. And then we're happier with the blood pressure. And then you can see we're still having some of this spike, but we're like 20 points less on a spike, which is cool. So even though we're still getting some of that, it's coming down, which is really cool after 10 days. That's awesome. And so the reason I like pointing these out is like, I don't want to show you these to be like, look at how amazing it is. This is so cool. But what I want to show you is what it actually looks like in a person. Like, this is what they go through. And at this moment, she's not like, I'm doing great. I'm all better now. She is like, I've been putting in work. This is hard. We've been working at it, but I've got something to show for it. I can see my needle is moving, right? And then we look over here and like starting to feel a little bit of something, feeling good, getting hopeful. This is the time in the game where everybody gets a little nervous because they're like, I'm feeling real hopeful. Things are moving right. I'm scared it's not going to work. What if it goes back? Starting to feel a little better. Don't want to feel terrible again. That's a very common sentiment. But that's just where we are. And then you can see here in all the ranges of motion, she cleaned them all up, which is crazy. So all of these were roughing it, and then she didn't pop any positives on the second time around. Huge win. So when I see that happen, I get real excited because I know we got a real good shot at one of these. And then so she has been just working like a crazy woman over the summer, not working entirely. I got a nice video of her enjoying herself in a great way, which is super cool, going out and doing some fun stuff. And so I love seeing that. Thank you for sending that if you're out there. Hopefully you're not. Hopefully you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing in college. But, and yeah, so then you get to see, like, because at this moment, like, we're riding high, we're really hopeful, but then we're also, this part is like, I feel all the feels because I feel really good because this is happening. But then we get in the feels of like, man, I'm turning over the reins. I don't get to control this perfectly when they go home because it's in her hands. She gets to be the one that decides to do these things every day. She's the one that's got to stick with it. I am giving it up, which I don't love doing, but that's part of the gig. And so there's a little bit of wait and see. There's a little bit of, okay, where are we going to stumble? Can we make the habits? Can we get them to stick? Can we see where the weak spots are going to be? How's it going to go going forward? So I think that's like a relatively honest appraisal of like how these cases tend to look. And some of them way miracles, some of them slog, right? But that's just the nature of it. So this kind of cuts through the middle, but it really speaks to the importance of what we primarily worked on here was a lot to do with two pieces, and I didn't show you the other one, but this cervical component, and then the component that comes with that was the fact that we actually had this cervicogenic nystagmus, which is wild. So we did some things to address the vestibular integration from this. So we know if we slide back up here that we're getting some problems with the head turn structurally, but also with the way she's managing that from a proprioceptive end. So we had to do things that were structural, right? Be able to have it so that she could shoot the blood into her head, but then also be able to recognize where her head is through that central vestibular system. So it's this melding of these two different types of presentations that I think are really important, because on my perception from where I sit is that there are a ton of people walking around with pictures that look just like this, because I see them constantly. But because this isn't on the forefront of what people talk about, just don't even know to look at it. And then like nothing that you're going to do from you know, teasing out chemistry standpoint or your diet, which she done. Like those things are all great for general health, but on these, that's not going to solve this particular problem. And so I just want to bring attention to that. Not saying that that's what everybody has or this is how everybody should be treated, but we should at least be giving it a look. And especially for those people that kind of fit that role, because there are so many of you walking around in this state that that we need to give a completely different strategy to. So that's what I was really interested in this week. That's what I felt called to talk about. So I hope that that's useful for you guys, just seeing some of the data points and seeing how they change. And they change remarkably quickly. But I will point out this idea. So I get this conversation a lot, which is, okay, I got the blood flow back in my head. I should be rocking and rolling now. And it's like, well, kind of. But also, you've got to get that blood flow in your head and you've got to let it heal. So there's an amount of healing that has been compromised along the way that needs to come back in. And then some integrity built out in this system again to actually make it stronger. So step one is like normalize it so that you can just get oxygen and glucose and all of the chemistry that you need back into the brain so that you can start to build the strength back in. And I think that part, I think that part's super important to kind of keep in mind is that's like first step, we got to get it there. And then we can start to get stronger after that.